Hi, this video is going to review migration concepts and measures. So we can begin by thinking about what a migratory event is, and that's a move in or out of a given population's territory. If we're coming into a country, we call that in-migration, or into a county or any kind of geographic unit, it's in-migration. If we're leaving from one place to another, we call that out-migration. So of course, depends. Those are two relative terms, right? It depends on what side you're standing on. Immigration and emigration refer specifically to cross national boundaries. Immigration, you're coming in. Like you think of the first letter I for in. And for emigration, it's E for emigration. You can think of that as exit, right? People are exiting the country. The key measure of migration is net migration, which is the difference between in and out migration for a given time frame. Now the problem is data collection on these two things is often spotty or unreliable. The term gross migration, which is a less commonly used concept, is the sum total of in and out migration. So it's sort of the total amount of movement that has happened. And of course, it's possible that we have an equal part in and out migration, which would result in a zero net migration, but would be reflected better in the gross migration measurement. So here are some measures and some equations that go with them. So the in-migration rate has to do with the number of people coming into the geographic unit per unit of population, across the whole population times 1,000. So this is an overall measure, not a group-specific measure. Outmigration is the other side of that, the number of people leaving per population times 1,000. And the net migration is I minus O over P per 1 times 1,000. While as the gross migration rate is I plus O over P times 1,000. All right, so those are just the equations that go along with those concepts we just reviewed. A couple of other interesting concepts that go along with migration are those of step migration. It's a pattern of migration between a sending and receiving population with intervening stops. So, for instance, one documented step migration was immigrants from Mexico, Puebla, Mexico, to New York City, and then people from New York City actually going to Kingston and Middleburg area, and then from there to Fleischmann's, right? So it's like this stepping across different geographic areas. Chain migration has to do with social networks, and generally when people go into a particular country, they bring family and friends over time, and that's chain migration. Migration can also be temporary, long-term, and permanent, or it may be very short-term and semi-permanent. There's quite a bit of variation in terms of the length of stay for different reasons. There's also involuntary migration, which is when somebody is forced to either come in or go out of a particular place. If somebody's banished, they're forced to leave, and if they're taken as slaves historically in the United States, for instance, were involuntary in-migrants to the United States. And then tourism starting to be conceptualized as a form of migration that's very, very temporary. People might just visit a place for a week, in which case you become a resident, so to speak, for 1 week. Now that's probably up for debate whether that's a form of migration, but it's certainly one end of the spectrum in terms of time. There are measurement issues to think about when we look at migration. There's no clear standards for measuring internal migration. So a lot of times in order to measure migration, we have to use this method where we subtract the rate of natural increase, which is just births minus deaths, from the overall population growth. So if we know population size over time, and we know the natural increase rate over time, we can deduce from that the net migration. But that net migration statistic won't tell us the gross migration that has taken place, right? The amount of people coming in and going out. So it's a very limited bit of information. We could finish by thinking about a few consequences of migration. That is, how does this result in terms of long-term outcomes when a population migrates into another region? One of those is adaptation, right, where the newcomers learn to adapt to the existing culture. Another one is acculturation, where the new culture is sort of taught over time. Assimilation is when minority groups are completely erased by completely being assimilated into the dominant culture. Integration doesn't necessarily imply assimilation. That just means that the new group is brought into a particular society and integrated in different ways. Of course, exclusion, a form of discrimination, has been another outcome of migration. And in multiculturalism, which involves, of course, allowing people to maintain their cultural practices and beliefs, even though they've relocated to a new society. Of course, we need to think about the impacts on the migrants themselves in terms of the types of incorporation, as well as on the receiving and sending communities. And they can be profound for both.